Hi there, my name is Mark Thwaites. I'm a solution engineer with Keyfactor, and today what we're going to do is we're going to dive into the Keyfactor Command Certificate Management application you can deploy from the ServiceNow Store. To start the demonstration, we're going to look at the setup instructions directly within the ServiceNow native experience. And this is how we're going to be able to connect directly to Command using OAuth, but also prepare the application so that it's ready for use within the organization. Once the application is deployed in your ServiceNow instance, your ServiceNow administrator will be able to go to All and then search for Keyfactor Command to jump to different configuration settings. They can also just save it as a favorite, so it's reflected here on the left-hand side, where we're going to go ahead and click on Setup Instructions. Now, the setup instructions are also defined directly in the installation guide, but we're going to go through each one of these sections one by one. On the right-hand side, we're going to click on Get Started. And here you can see we're going to configure the connection. We're going to populate application data, retrieve metadata, and also run a script to populate data into our flows. So let's go ahead and get started with the configuration for the connection. And we're going to see the first one is going to be configuring OAuth. After you click on Configure, you'll be prompted with OAuth information that will require population, such as the client ID, the secret, the token URL, and also the redirect URL. It's encouraged to work with your identity access management team who set up your integration for OAuth with Keyfactor Command to populate these details accordingly. Once you come back into the setup instructions, you can optionally click on Mark as Complete, which will go ahead and increment the actual completion for this section, or just move on to the next step, which is going to be configuring the OAuth connection by clicking on Configure. Here we're just updating one URL in the following field, which is going to be the Keyfactor Command API URL. To get this URL, you can go into Keyfactor Command, go to your API utility, which is a Swagger interface, and refer to your browser. It's usually going to be the FQDN of your command instance with a /Keyfactor API. But depending upon how your command instance was deployed, that URL may be different. Ensure it's defined here correctly because this is the foundational root URL that is used for all API calls that are executed from ServiceNow to your Keyfactor Command instance. Next is the configuration of the auth property. Now this value that is reflected here is what is shipped with the application. But if your organization is defining your own connection and credential alias system ID, then you would update the corresponding value to be leveraged by the application. The next step, which may be optional, is uploading the root of trust certificate, where you go ahead and click on Configure, and you could load that trust chain directly into ServiceNow. The reason this is important is because when the API calls are performed, it's going to validate that trust chain. In most cases, Keyfactor Command will be tied to a publicly trusted certificate, so that should not be an issue. But let's say your Keyfactor Command instance is tied to an internal cert, maybe for, let's say, development or testing, you want to load that trust chain in. You can definitely refer to our installation guide on how to download the certificate from your command instance and load it directly into ServiceNow. Next will be the configuration of the REST message. So this is the default REST message that is shipped with the application. We're going to go ahead and click on that record. And what we're going to see is that we're going to update the endpoint for RESTful calls, but also a couple HTTP methods. So the endpoint here, this will be very similar to what we defined earlier, where it's normally going to be the FQDN of your command instance /Keyfactor API, but you'll put another / after that. If your URL is a little bit different for your command instance, update the endpoint and the following methods accordingly. So for the methods in question, we're going to do it for get templates and also for get all cert. For get all templates, what we're going to do is we're going to define this as the FQDN of the command instance /Keyfactor API /templates. And then for get all cert, it'll be the FQDN of your command instance /Keyfactor API /certificates. Once you've got those saved, you can definitely move on, but you do have the option here where you can go ahead and click on Get OAuth Token to verify that your OAuth integration is valid. The APIs that you updated, that's really going to be tested when we start leveraging the application itself. Once the configure the connection section is completed, then you can start working on populating application data. And that's where you're creating application records for all your application owners so they can perform enrollments, renewals, and revocation for their certificates. So this is critical because you don't want to have a situation where your users are going to log into ServiceNow to use this app and they're not going to be able to make a request. So what you're going to do is you basically have two options. You can either import or create records directly within the applications table that is shipped with this application, or it's more of an ad hoc situation where you have, let's say, an application administrator who creates these records when you need them for, let's say, new users who are onboarding who need certificates within your organization. So what we can do is we can go over to Get Started. And then over here, we can click on Configure. And what this will do is it'll take you directly into the Applications table. And you could either create the records manually, or it could be an import. So this is where you could work with your PKI admin team to identify who all your cert requesters are. What FQDN or FQDNs are they allowed to request? Who's going to be their approver? You know, what group would that be tied to? So once you have that information, you could put all that into maybe a CSV, load that into ServiceNow into, let's say, a staging table, and then push that into your applications table. And then for requests going forward, where you need to create, let's say, more records, then it could be a catalog item like we have here, where you have an application admin who populates the appropriate information to enable those specific users. But you always have the option where you can also do it directly in the applications table as well. Just make sure you have all those application records defined as a good base level before you start opening up this application for your users to consume it within the organization. Once your application data has been populated, which are your application records for your application owners, then what you can do is you can retrieve your metadata directly from Keyfactor Command for your PFX and CSR catalog items. And the way we do that is by clicking on Get Started, and it's going to provide you details on how you actually open up the catalog item as an administrator. And once you've selected that catalog item, you just refresh the page. And what you want to do is you want to scroll down to the bottom of the record and make sure all the appropriate certificate metadata that you're exposing to the application is reflected. So what we have here may vary depending upon how your Keyfactor Command instance has been set up. And then you go ahead and do the same thing for CSR. Basically open up that catalog item, refresh the page, and then confirm your metadata is coming across. And this is a one-time configuration where your users will just see the proper fields when they go ahead and make a request. And then the final configuration which is required is to populate key algorithm and key size attributes into the PFX enrollment flow so that when a user selects, let's say, RSA or ECC, the proper key sizes are reflected. And the way this is done is you basically go to Application Scope and set this to Global. You'll navigate to All System Definition Fixed Scripts. You'll create a new script. You'll define the following parameters. We provide the script here. You'll toggle this back to the Keyfactor Command Certificate Management scope, and then you'll run the script. And then to verify it, you basically open up that PFX catalog item and just ensure that when you select RSA or ECC, the appropriate key sizes are reflected. And finally, to go ahead and close out the configurations from ServiceNow to Keyfactor Command, there are two more areas I want to go ahead and review, which may be configured or leveraged depending upon your requirements. And that's going to be under Administration, where we have Scheduled Script Executions, and then there's also the Properties page for the application itself. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at Scheduled Script Executions. And what this will do is it'll bring up a single record for the Keyfactor certificate import. And that sounds exactly like what it's going to do. It's going to allow you to execute now to do an on-demand API call against Keyfactor Command to bring in every single active certificate. And those records will get populated in the shipped certificates table so that you can go ahead and start assigning those to your application owners. And the benefit of this is that those users would see those certificates in their inventory, so they could go ahead and download the certificate if needed. But more importantly, if you're going to be setting up expiration alerting and creating incidents directly within ServiceNow, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in this session, you're going to be able to enable your users to be able to renew a certificate that they may have not actually enrolled against directly within ServiceNow because it was done prior within the Keyfactor Command platform. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the properties page. So this page reflects all the different properties and configuration items that are tied to the application. In most cases, they're going to be the API paths, which may be important if they do change within the Keyfactor Command platform, so you can go and edit them directly within here. But you'll also see the connection and credential alias system ID at the top. And there is a property here where you can go ahead and change the chain order when a PEM file is downloaded. But you can go ahead and scroll and see that there's not very many operations that are going to be adjusted at the property level. But if you do need to go ahead and alter how you are logging messages generated directly against the application for its specific destination, and also the verbosity of that logging, you'll be able to do so here. And these details are very well documented within this page to be able to understand what exact options will be available to you. As we've seen, most of the integrations are directly from ServiceNow to Keyfactor Command, but there is one option where you can go ahead and set up expiration alerting within Keyfactor Command to trigger a workflow where when a certificate comes up for expiration, it'll go ahead and create an incident directly within ServiceNow and also notify the application owner that that certificate is coming up for expiration, where they can go ahead and perform that renewal. So to be able to set this up within Command, you do need to create a certificate collection that is tied to the expiration alert. So I can go over to Certificates and Certificate Search, and I can determine how I want to organize those certificates together that I want to go ahead and create these incidents for. So that could be based off any parameters that you want to go ahead and search your certificate inventory against. So in my example here, I performed a search and I clicked on Save, and I created this collection called e-commerce certificates. So when any of these certificates are coming up for expiration based off a definition that I'll define here shortly, that's going to go ahead and kick off a workflow to do that type of incident creation directly within ServiceNow. And then Keyfactor Command will also notify the application owner. So where this ties in is if I go to Alerts and Expiration, you can see here daily at 5 a.m., which is configurable. This alert will go ahead and kick off, and it'll go ahead and view every single certificate that's in that collection and see if any are coming up for expiration within 10 days. If so, it'll go ahead and run the configured workflow. Now, the configured workflow is something that will require definition, but in the installation guide, we go through each step on how it's configured, and there's also a sample JSON in the appendix. But ultimately, what happens here is we're getting information directly from Keyfactor using an internal API using OAuth. We're going to parse that data, and then we're going to go ahead and send a request directly over to ServiceNow using an API to create the incident. Now, depending upon how your ServiceNow instance is set up, it may be using basic authentication or maybe OAuth. You may require a service account directly within that instance so that it can perform this type of API call within the platform. We're also going to go ahead and pull the application owner because we want that email address so we can go ahead and notify that recipient that their certificate is coming up for expiration. And then we'll go ahead and pull that information from that API call, and then we'll go ahead and send out that email. So here we can define the actual email within the actual workflow that is going to be sent to the application owner. So when they receive that email, they're going to be able to have instructions or details to go into ServiceNow to go ahead and renew that certificate before it expires. And if you want to go ahead and adjust any of these cards to add additional functions or features, you can definitely do that. But this may be really helpful for certificates that you do not have under automation, where the certificate's going to automatically renew within the Keyfactor Command platform. So this will wrap up the demonstration on how to set up your Keyfactor Command Certificate Management application that you can deploy from the ServiceNow Store. If you have any more questions, definitely refer to the installation guide or reach out to Keyfactor directly. Thank you.